Number 1. Literal garbage. Yes, that was the actual name. Let's wrap this list up with a dish so wild, it was literally called garbage. No fancy Latin. No poetic medieval flair. Just straight up garbage. And somehow, it made it to the dinner table. So what went into this appetizingly named stew? Well, everything nobody else wanted. The chicken's head, liver, gizzards, all the scraps and throwaway bits. They'd toss it all into a pot and pour in some fresh beef broth. Not bad, right? But wait, here comes the flavor bomb. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, mace, parsley, sage. Basically, every spice they had access to. Still hungry? Good, because now they'd dunk an entire loaf of bread into the mix, boil it down, strain it, then boil it again. Then, for that perfect medieval twist, they'd add juice from unripe apples, because why not? Some salt, and a sprinkle of saffron. Not for taste, but for color. Because when your dish is called garbage, it might as well look nice. And when it came time to serve, you had two options. English style, leave the chunky bits in, own the mess. French style, strain everything out, and serve it as a smooth, soupy broth. Either way, it wasn't pretty, but it was hearty, hot, and, if you squinted hard enough, not the worst thing on this list. Garbage, the medieval version of don't waste a thing. Number 2. Pigeons, from peasant protein to sky blood medicine. In a world where hunting deer or boar could get you jailed, or worse, peasants had to work with what was legal. And that's where pigeons came in. They were one of the few types of meat that common folk were allowed to hunt or raise. Easy to catch, easy to cook, and, most importantly, not owned by the king. But pigeons weren't just food. Oh no, these birds were also considered miraculous healers. Their blood, believe it or not, was thought to cure everything from fevers to seizures. Why? Because pigeons could fly high in the sky, closer to the heavens. So, naturally, people believed their blood carried divine energy. That meant pigeon blood became the Tylenol of the Middle Ages. Headache? Pigeon blood. Fever? Pigeon blood. Mystery illness that probably had nothing to do with pigeons? You guessed it, more pigeon blood. And the treatment wasn't subtle either. We're talking fresh, warm blood, either rubbed directly on the skin or mixed into potions. Definitely not for the squeamish. So while nobles dined on peacock and peasants gnawed black bread, everyone agreed on one thing. Pigeons were basically feathered medicine cabinets. Number 3. Medieval ale, the drink that saved everyone's stomach. In the Middle Ages, drinking water was like playing Russian roulette with your health. Contaminated rivers, filthy wells. Water was often more dangerous than helpful. So what did people drink instead? Ale. Lots of it. Even the kids. But this wasn't your modern IPA. Medieval ale was mild, brewed for hydration more than celebration. And thanks to the brewing process, especially the boiling, it was way safer than water. Now here's where it gets interesting. The flavor didn't come from hops, which weren't common yet. It came from a secret blend of wild herbs. And to use those herbs, brewers needed a license called a grut right. Without it, you couldn't legally gather the plants needed for brewing. That made each ale's recipe a closely guarded secret, like the medieval version of Coca-Cola. Quality control was also a thing. Some towns had official ale tasters whose job was literally to sample brews and make sure no one was selling foul, watered-down junk. Fun fact, in London, they still appoint ceremonial ale tasters to this day. So next time you crack open a cold one, remember, medieval people drank ale not to party, but to survive. Cheers to that. Number 4. Hedgehogs, dinner with a side of spikes. In the Middle Ages, if something crawled into your garden and ate your crops, chances are, it was about to become dinner. And that includes one of the spikiest suspects of all, the hedgehog. These little guys loved snacking on plants, roots, and bark, basically stealing what little the peasants had. So, naturally, when people caught one, it was both pest control and mealtime. But here's the problem. They're covered in spikes. Not exactly fork and knife friendly. So what did medieval folks do? They got clever. They'd coat the entire hedgehog in mud, then roast it over a fire. As it cooked, the mud hardened into a shell, and when cracked open, it peeled the spines away with it. What you were left with was tender meat that supposedly tasted like a mix between chicken and pork. But that's not all. Hedgehogs weren't just food. They were also used as medieval medicine. To cure a toothache, people would burn the spines into ash, place the ashes on cotton, and stick it on the sore tooth. Yes, really. Spiked creature in, pain out. So next time you see a cute hedgehog, just be glad you live in a time where it's a garden guest, not a mud-roasted remedy. Number 5. Acorn bread, turning forest trash into treasure. When money's tight and wheat is a luxury, what do? If you were a medieval peasant, you looked at the ground and thought, yep, those acorns will do. But wait, before you imagine people chomping on raw acorns like squirrels, let's be clear, raw acorns are nasty. They're packed with tannins, the same stuff that makes your mouth feel dry after strong tea. Eat them straight off the ground, and you'd be hugging the nearest bush. So how did they pull it off? They got smart. Peasants soaked and rinsed the acorns again and again, leaching out the bitter toxins. Then they dried them, ground them into flour, and voila, acorn bread. Was it delicious? Not exactly. Was it nutritious? Kind of. Was it cheap, filling, and kept you from starving? Absolutely. In a world where survival meant using whatever nature gave you, acorns became the bread of the desperate but resourceful. It wasn't fancy, but it kept people going. From forest floor to dinner table, acorns did the job. Number 6. Beavers, the fish that definitely wasn't a fish. Fasting was a big deal in the Middle Ages. For huge chunks of the year, people had to avoid meat. But luckily, fish was fair game. So what did hungry peasants and crafty nobles do? They got creative with the definition of fish. Enter the beaver. It swims, it has a tail, it lives in water. So someone looked at it and thought, close enough. The church, surprisingly, went along with it. If it lived in water and sort of looked like a fish, then during fasting, beavers on the menu. At first, they just ate the tail because it was flat, fishy looking, and kind of made sense if you squinted hard enough. But by the 17th century, people were going all in. The whole beaver was considered fasting appropriate. Yes, really. Because, apparently, good swimmers equals fish. Of course, this didn't end well for the beavers. They were hunted into extinction in England, Wales, and Scotland. Only recently have they made a comeback, thanks to Canadian reintroduction programs, and probably because no one's calling them fish anymore. So next time you hear someone bending the rules, remember, at least they didn't classify a beaver as seafood. Number 7. Pies and pastries, the medieval lunchbox. When it came to survival, peasants didn't just get creative, they got culinary clever. Enter the medieval pie, not the flaky, buttery kind you're dreaming of. Nope. This was more like a portable fortress for food, wrapped in thick, nearly inedible dough called a coffin. That's right, they literally called it a coffin. Why? Because it was meant to preserve the food, protect it, and carry it around all day. Think of it as the Tupperware of the Middle Ages, except it was baked and, sometimes, edible. Inside these hardy shells, peasants would stuff meats, vegetables, or fruits, basically anything they could find. The crust was rock solid, not meant to be savored, but simply to contain the meal and keep it from spoiling. So if you ever bit into a medieval pie and thought, this crust tastes like dirt, well, you weren't supposed to eat that part. But as a grab-and-go meal for long days in the fields, it was perfect. No need for plates, utensils, or even teeth in great shape. Just crack it open and dig in. Medieval meal prep? Nailed it. Number 8. Roasted peacock. Feast for the eyes, and maybe the stomach. If black bread was peasant food, roasted peacock was the stuff of royal fantasy. This wasn't just dinner, it was a medieval spectacle. Reserved for the fanciest feasts and most jaw-dropping banquets, this bird was treated like edible royalty. First, the cook would carefully remove the peacock's glorious skin and shimmering feathers, without damaging them. Then, the bird was roasted to perfection. But they weren't done yet. After cooking, the chef would redress the peacock in its original feathers and skin, arranging it to look like it had never left the perch. The result? A dinner that looked alive and majestic, but was actually fully cooked. The ultimate food illusion. And here's the kicker. Peacock meat was believed to last for 30 days without spoiling. That's a whole month of leftovers from one flamboyant bird. So while peasants were gnawing on bark-filled bread, nobles were carving into something that looked like it belonged in a royal garden, not on a platter. Peacock, the most fabulous meat you probably shouldn't eat. Number 9. Dinner shows, when your food tried to escape. You might think medieval meals were all grimy porridge and stale bread, but oh no, some dinners were straight-up performance art. Forget Netflix. In the Middle Ages, your dinner table was the show. Here's how it worked. A chef would pluck a chicken, paint it to look perfectly roasted, then wait for it to fall asleep. Once the meal looked convincingly dead, it was carried to the table, placed in front of some hungry nobles. And right when someone reached for the knife, boom, the chicken would spring to life and bolt off the table, feathers flying, people screaming. They didn't stop with chickens. They stuffed live frogs into pies. Yes, pies. And when someone cut into the crust, the frogs jumped out like medieval jack-in-the-boxes, hopping all over the feast. Sounds ridiculous? It was. But this was medieval humor. Chaotic, weird, and probably hilarious if you weren't the one chasing your dinner around the room. Forget fine dining. This was fine chaos. Number 10. Black bread, the medieval toothbreaker. Forget your fluffy sourdough from the artisan bakery. This was bread with an attitude. Black bread was the everyday staple of medieval peasants, and calling it tough would be an understatement. It was made mostly from rye. Sure, but the real shocker? They added tree bark. Not for flavor, not for fiber, just because wheat flour was insanely expensive and bark was free. Biting into this stuff was basically a dental challenge. Some loaves were so dense and rock hard, they could double as blunt weapons or emergency building materials. In fact, soldiers sometimes used slices of this bread as makeshift plates. They'd pile food on top, wait for it to soak through, and then eat the plate. Waste nothing. Think today's eco-friendly eating habits are modern? Medieval peasants were unintentionally zero-waste pioneers. This bread was cheap, filling, and everywhere. It was the fast food of the Middle Ages. Was it good for you? Probably not. But if your other option was starvation, black bread started looking like a pretty solid meal. Literally.